Hello and welcome to another episode of a Wicked Parley. Tonight we're going to be discussing whether or not society is in decline. Whether or not we all have something to be really worried about. So when talking about society, there are a couple of points that we should address. The first main point is how do we determine whether or not society is actually, doing well or doing poorly? And the second is how our overall look at how taxes are spent, how projects in the community are conducted, to know whether or not they're doing well for the people that they're supposed to work for. So those are the two main things. Hi and hello, host, and hi, Nerd Safi. Welcome to the show. Rose, do you have anything to say?
I'm just hoping that society is not wholly on a decline. So I'm curious to see as to how society is just trying to help and improve society. So.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you there. There's definitely a lot of research that went into this particular episode that kind of points towards a lot of things that are promising. So yay, happy. But
we need some happiness in this world right now.
Yeah, but there's also some pretty negatives as well. So yeah. So for those who are interested in both sides of this particular topic, there will be a part 2. Just so you guys know. But let's jump into the main talking points. And the first main talking point that we need to get to is definitions. So we need to define exactly what a prosperous society kind of is, or a society that's doing well. And I figure prosperous is probably a fairly easy way of going about saying it. So, Rose, if you don't mind, could you throw up the definition for prosperous? I know this is kind of par for the course at this point.
All right, prosperous. So we're not going with the first one because it makes me want to click something. Yeah. So for number 2, marked by success or economic well-being, or B, enjoying vigorous and healthy growth.
Vigorous. I'm sorry.
No, it's just because of societal definitions now whenever we hear those words.
I know, right? Yeah, but in all seriousness, prosperous, and I'm assuming when we come to this particular definition, we kind of are focusing on the second part of this particular question. Mostly marking, success economically and overall creating well-being throughout a given community is the way in which I'm going to be talking about it from this particular point on. There is another definition that I would like us to kind of take a look at. And that particular definition has to do with what happens when society is not doing well, when it's not being fortunate.
When it is in decline.
Decline. And when it comes to this, do you want to go ahead and read the main definition we're going to be using tonight?
Sure. So I believe it was this one, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yep. Number 2, to tend toward an inferior state or weaker condition.
I mean, honestly, whenever I think of a state in decline or a country in decline, the things that I think of are its infrastructure is crumbling, its economy is falling apart, there's civil strife everywhere, or there's acts of violence and things that are not in check. And so these are the kinds of things that I kind of think more or less describe a society that's not doing so well. And so we're going to be using the word decline to talk about societies that are not doing good. Mm-hmm. All right, and then there are 2 other definitions that I think are kind of important for us to address also. I know this is kind of out there on the thing, but the first one we're going to discuss is a utopian utopian society, and also just looking kind of at utopia as a main definition. You want to go ahead and read the one which we're going to use?
Yep. So the first one, correct?
Yes.
So, often capitalized, a place of ideal perfection, especially in laws, government, and social conditions.
Yes. This is incredibly important because, in my personal opinion, spoiler alert, utopias, no, they're not a good thing for people. They're really, really bad. and that's because there is no person, no matter where you go, that is going to always be satisfied and happy with whatever happens. And so, you're going to find that one grumpy person who's like, everyone else is doing well, and they're like so pissed in their oatmeal, and so you're like, well, that guy's upset for some reason. And there's always going to be that one person. So it's important that we discuss utopia and utopian societies in one particular thing. And getting through this kind of definitions-wise, I know it's a bit obnoxious because normally we just throw down one definition, but I kind of wanted to make sure that we had definitions for our key talking points in this particular episode.
Need to be on the same basic foundation here.
Yes, we do. Because this can get into the weeds real quick. You just go off in the field and be like, okay, we just lost everything. And if we're talking about utopian society, then I think most people probably understand what the next one is, which is a dystopian society.
Dun, 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 dun.
Now, there are many ways that dystopian societies have been defined, but do you want to go ahead and read the one we've decided on?
Sure. I'm still laughing at the second one, though.
Yeah, the second one is hilarious. I'm not gonna...
So the one we're actually going with is an imagined world or society in which people lead wretched, dehumanized, fearful lives. The second one's just funny because it's quite literally saying it's an anti-utopia.
Yeah. But to be fair, it's kind of an okay way of looking at it. It's just, it lacks the imagination and detail that I think is necessary. And hi and welcome, Kyle.
Yep.
Alrighty then.
So when we're talking about dystopia, we're not talking about, this, right?
No, we're not talking about the distant, far-flung future where cybernetic organisms will take over the planet and destroy us all. Thank you, Elon Musk, for your words of warning that no one listened to. Cyberdyne will rule us all. Anyways.
So, do we want to just read the chat real quick? Because
I see that. And let's go ahead and let's run through a few of the ones that you think are important to mention.
Yeah, sure. So, when we asked whether or not society is in decline or whether it's being prosperous, Nerd Safi says, technically it is in decline for the old way of society. Doesn't mean that society as a whole is declining, just that this phase that society is going through. If society goes out, it won't be for a fat while.
I have hopefully through this episode and the future episode, we'll be able to address that fully. Because unfortunately, I think there's some information that kind of points to some slight inconsistencies with your thought process, but when it comes to that particular thing, evidence-wise, but everything's up to opinion, because future hasn't happened yet. Present is definitely a perspective kind of thing. Same thing with the past, so it's highly speculative. So
we're up for discussion.
Yes, indeed. So
that's what the show is for.
Yeah, and so here's the other thing too. I want to say this too. The chat for this particular episode and potentially for future episodes, I just want this to be fully understood. If you say something in the chat that has something to what we're actually discussing in the moment, we will very likely get to that chat at some point in the episode, and I encourage that participation because I enjoy it very much. So I hope that this discussion will continue and we'll all get something out of it.
As for the last two comments, also from Safi.
Okay. Personal
opinion here. All societies are prosperous and declining in their own ways, some more skewed towards one than others. As an example, they give the US is prosperous in the military, but in decline medically.
That's an interesting point. We will get to some of that in more detail in the future, but I will definitely agree with your position about the fact that in the US, for instance, that we definitely are prosperous and we put a lot of our time and money and resources into promoting a military that is quite bloated and very large, and to some extent you might make the argument unnecessarily large, while we have a healthcare system that is the envy of maybe the Third Reich, or some third world nation. But when it comes to modern countries and other first world nations, certainly they have better systems in place than what we have. I mean, I think people pay way too much money. There's way too much going on, and when it comes to things that could be improved, so definitely agree with that. But yeah, without going too much into it, is there any other comments from the section, or do we want to continue on?
We can go ahead and move on. Thankfully, we have a person who's ready for discussion now that we've labeled out some definitions. Milestone number 1. Woohoo!
Excellent. Awesome.
Oh, hold on. I just found a comment.
Okay.
Curse that delay.
That's okay.
So Kyle believes that they don't believe we are in decline. They think we're decadent?
Yes.
In a state of comfortable stagnation. NPR's left, right, and center had a show about this.
That's an interesting position. I think that's probably. I'm going to say evidence-wise that I would say I disagree with that position, but I think you're welcome to have that position. And I think the main reason is the fact that if you look back at the previous decades, you can look at from any avenue you choose, but you can look at it economically is probably the easiest way to kind of address things, because it kind of shows like how much wealth and like there is, where the wealth kind of goes, and kind of how policies are dictated. Also, did you want to throw up the game footage while we're talking about this?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right.
Da-da-da.
Anyways, so while the U.S. has since it's been around, has had many highs and lows, and if you look at the way in which the stock market, as an example, kind of goes, there's ups and downs, of course, and there are instances of great success and also huge portions of crashes as well. And when it comes to the overall percentage of wealth and its distribution across the population, though, you see essentially as you get closer and closer to modern times, it disproportionately is represented by a smaller and smaller group of individuals, and so it's less being spread out and being condensed into one specific subsect of the population, which is why you have that 1% that basically controls 99% of everything else, just because of the amount of wealth and the way it's skewed.
Alright.
Yeah.
So enough about that.
Yeah,
We're trying to figure out where society is trying to improve itself for at least this part of the episode.
Yes.
So, ready to begin?
Let's jump into it.
Alright, and I'll make sure to keep an eye on the chat, so feel free to put in your comments, and we'll try to fit them in, not in the middle of a sentence, but... Alright, so, what do you know of some of the efforts being made to improve life in other countries?
Well, there's a lot that can be said about efforts that have been put forth by various nations around the world when it comes to helping out people in need, and also trying to, teach and support nations. The United States is definitely a country that has done nation building. It also has done many things, humanitarian efforts and whatnot, to develop schools and hospitals and bring food and water to people who need it. And that's something that never gets stated enough. I don't think a lot of people recognize just how much stuff people do. Other countries in the world, like China is an example of a country that also does a lot of building of schools, roads, hospitals, and things like that in other countries, particularly in the third world, particularly in places like Africa, and in areas that have like road or land-based access to oil. And they're motivated by a combination of position and acquisition of wealth. They don't do it as friendly gestures. You can make the argument that the U.S. also conducts themselves in a way that's for them, but I think more often than not, the U.S. goes to try and stabilize an area is the goal. Now, whether the goal is achieved, the outcome is the way it is. That's up for debate, and I think that the U.S. has failed tremendously in that area as of late, with the whole thing going on with Afghanistan. But I think that the end up goal is typically to do well and try to stabilize regions that don't really have good governing bodies. And I think that's one thing that it shows that society as a whole, if you look at society as a global effort rather than just a one group, one community, that is an area that we definitely are excelling at. More nations around the world are doing more things to support other nations than pretty much any other point in human history. So I think that's kind of a good thing.
So much stuff. Oh my gosh.
All right, yeah. So I noticed that Kyle has a thing in the chat. Do you want to read through it, or do you want to wait?
This is more about kind of what it means for their version of society being in decline, or whether or not a society is actually in decline or not.
This is why it was so important to throw the definitions that we had up in the beginning part. So that way, Kyle, you understand exactly where we stand when it comes to those particular things.
Yeah. So for us, we're going with the definition of it's just going to an inferior state or a weaker condition.
Namely, the weaker condition element of it is, I think, the part that it shows the trajectory that the policies and leaders are taking the country, which is why I think it's important to probably look at things from as indifferent of an opinion as possible, because if you are yay all for America or yay negative America, you may come to completely different conclusions based upon those particular biases. And I would like to have an honest discussion about these particular things and analyze the evidence that can be found. And, yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, I think the comment would be best for the part 2 episode when we're discussing, whether society is actually in decline or not.
All right, well then let's save it.
Yeah, I'm saving it, definitely.
All right.
So thank you, and we have that comment saved for the next bit.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I can answer some of the decline elements, because it is a discussion of whether or not it is in decline. So you'll have to kind of like pick and choose when it comes to some of them, because I think that, I mean, we can speak to it all, but I guess I'll just say this now. I will present evidence for both sides, but if you were to ask my personal opinion right now about what it is, I think it's probably fair to say that I think that society is in decline, strictly by the definition basis. And I would say that just because if you look at the quality of life of the average American in 1950 and compare that to the average American in 1970, and then you compare the average American again in 2000, and then 2010, then 2020, then you see each time you look at it, there'd be less and less prosperous, less and less wealth, less and less ability to actually pay for the necessities of life. So, but we'll get there. we'll definitely get there. I just I want to be fair to anyone who's watching, so that way they know that, like, well, I have my own biases, but I'm willing to present the information as it is.
All right, and I'll see if another question matches it better. The comments, at least. All right. So, our second question is, what do you think would happen if we didn't have all the reform and rehab programs we have today?
All right. Well, I'm going to start off by saying that it would be catastrophic for virtually every single class of people that is dependent upon the resources of other people. And when I say other people, I mean like individuals that need a fire department. Like if you live in an area where there's lots of fires, like I do right now, where there's a fire that's been blazing for like almost a month, and there's like hella smoke. Like fire departments are one of those things that would kind of be terrible if we lost them. I kind of have some evidence to suggest that in the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan became president, he rolled back a whole bunch of programs that were designed to facilitate people who were basically kind of needy, when it came to like food stamps, when it came to public services and things like that. And what we saw was an increased number of people who became homeless, an increased number of suicides, an increased number of mental health issues and problems, and we saw an explosion of drug use. So when you take those particular programs away, and especially take programs away from people who actually use those resources and need them, you can create very large problems that basically go unseen until several years after the fact. And there's a definite reason of why the 1990s were so difficult for the people who were of the poorest economic status, because the structures that were there before in the past to support people who had gotten into those particular predicaments, often entirely of their, not because they were necessarily did something bad, but because they're just, maybe they became, accessed the job market at that particular time, educational opportunities, etc. They just wrong place, wrong time, and they all had to pay the price for it. So, I mean, those are just one thing that kind of points to it. But I think, if there's anything that could be learned from all these things, the one thing that should be said is that typically, if your society is built up upon a series of programs that essentially assist one group of people who are not as fortunate as another, and you take that particular thing away, you immediately create inequality and exploitation. And so when people are desperate and they don't have the means to do things, bad things typically happen. So even if you are doing something with the best of intentions, if you're removing something that is a necessary resource for people, then you're going to make people suffer. And that's something that a lot of politicians don't, I think, truly account for when they do certain things and they write certain legislation. So, do you have anything to kind of comment to that, or?
I'm just thinking, if any of my friends and family needed those programs and they didn't get the help they needed, not only would, I be upset, but the fact that they would have existed and then taken away like that. Like you said, they're necessary for quite a number of people because they provide resources that aren't readily available depending on the circumstance. So it's just pretty much, I'm just very, very happy that these programs exist, only to help people.
Yeah, I gotta say, when it comes to certain policies, there's been a lot of progress that's happened in the last about 10, 12 years that has really gone a long way to helping a lot of people out. I mean, the way in which the college systems kind of function today is a byproduct of a lot of legislation that's put into place during the Obama years. And allowed for a lot of those things to kind of just be transactionary. So now that 4-year educations are more accessible to more people. So if you're of a lower economic status and you go to school, and let's say you can start school at a community college, and then you decide to do something better with your life outside of just getting an associate's degree, which is, to be honest, not much more than a high school degree at this point, with the way it's viewed in the job market. You basically now have a roadmap to be able to go pursue those and not be in $1 billion of debt or something like that, some crazy amount of debt. So,
gosh.
Master's degrees and PhDs still require a certain amount of money, and if you go to law school or become a doctor, then of course the loans you probably would have to take if your family's not wealthy, or hell, even if it is wealthy but you can't afford it or whatever, those are still outrageous. But at least the 4-year institutions, the things that let you get your foot in the door, those are becoming more tolerable, and it's because of policies that were done relatively recently.
So we do have a couple of things in the chat if we want to go for that.
Sure, yeah.
So one of them, it's kind of out of order the way I'm gonna say these, because I feel like it kind of needs to if I'm going to get anywhere. Sure,
yeah, I got you, it's fine.
Yeah, so the first comment that I'm going to read off is more of a question which leads into the other ones.
Okay.
So Kyle asks, how would you differentiate decline and stagnation? Because they've mentioned before that they don't believe society is in decline.
Yeah.
They believe society is in a state of stagnation, because they believe that decline would mean something like the end of the Roman Empire. Things are breaking down, not functioning, things are bad, but they're comfortably bad.
Yeah. So here's the thing when it comes to the Roman Empire analogy. It's been cited before in the past as kind of the United States is going to fall just like the Roman Empire. And much like all the people who have predicted cataclysms and the end of the world and things like that, they've been wrong. All of them are wrong. And the reason why they're wrong is because, well, no one can tell the future. And when it comes to the difference between stagnation and decline, the reason why I mention it like that is because the people who talk about decline most often, the way in which people, I would say, are taught to perceive decline is that it is a catastrophic, huge, ginormous, problem that, is the end of the ways of life. It's like, no, you're just gonna, have less money, you're gonna have less resources, there's less opportunities. That's what I mean by decline. Stagnation implies that everything is status quo, that everything's equal. And I would say that if you look around, I believe you're paying probably, I'm gonna guess we're at something close to 30% inflation at this point when it comes to the grocery store. So inflation proves that stagnation is not possible in the United States at the very least. If you look at it from a global perspective, if you try to go buy wood right now, you're going to have a real hard time because the prices are just outrageous. It depends upon how you look at things, and I definitely think that when I say decline, I am not referring to the cataclysmic kind of thing like a fall of a giant empire that's existed for hundreds of years. What I'm saying is that things are not going well. Things are not doing as well as they used to, and it's due to a combination of factors, and I'd like to discuss those particular factors. I do think that there is a case to be made for a society to not be in decline, and I'm going to discuss that particular evidence today. And I don't want to get tucked too much into the whole position of where I actually stand on it, only because that's not for this episode. That'll be for next time.
Just to reiterate, today's episode is about how society is not, or parts of society is not in decline. The whole society is in decline will be for another part, because if we try to put the two together, it's not going to be able to give the time necessary for both.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't allow us the time to actually having a nuanced discussion about the two issues at hand, which I think is necessary to be fair to the subject. And it should also be pointed out, as in the future, I'm intending on trying to be a little bit more direct with the information that I'm putting out, and being a little bit more, here's the actual evidence and here's the actual facts. And so while in the discussion in the live stream, it makes it a little bit problematic to pull up sites, resources, and things like that, in the future, things that cite things that I actually talk about that I can be validated, I will be putting into the description later on or in the comment section. So, and if I'm wrong about something, also feel free to correct me. I mean, I'm not going to be perfect, so
we like having discussions. That's it.
Yeah, discussions are critical for knowledge. I mean, nobody's right all the time, and people have something to say all the time that is valid and fair and should be heard. So, all right. Anyways, I hope that helped address the question at least.
Yeah.
When it comes to it.
I'm hoping.
And if not,
if not, we can come back.
Yeah.
We can come back to it.
And you said there was a couple other comments, right?
The whole just making sure that our audience knew what today's episode is versus what next time's episode is, because I think we tried explaining it before, but it didn't latch on properly, so I just wanted to reiterate it.
Okay.
So, next bit. So, what programs are you happy to have in effect today that didn't exist over a decade ago?
Yeah, this one's actually kind of pretty darn tricky, to be honest with you. And the reason why is because policies and programs get written literally every single day, become effective for a certain number of years while they have funding, and then they go away. And so, yeah, that would be an example of some of this. Because if you looked at any one of those particular policies, those particular programs, then you would find out pretty quickly that some of them are designed as grants. So when the money's gone, and you no longer have the support of those particular things. But I think the existence of those particular policies is a really good thing, and it shows that we are at least open to progressive answers to certain problems that are somewhat dynamic in nature. And so, I would say, if I was going to point to any one particular policy, I think, although it hasn't been officially put locked down super right now, there's a group of individuals that are looking at the homeless problem in I'm blanking right now on the name. I pulled it up though, right? Where is it?
Here?
Yes, I think so. Well, no, is it that one? I don't think so. Sorry.
We'll need to find it again later.
We'll find it. We'll put it in the link. But there's a program that's being put up that essentially not only does it actually have I would say is a very solid solution to the problem of the homeless, but it does it in a way that doesn't demean or dehumanize the person. It does something that I think is really helpful. It makes them a meaningful member and contributing member of society. For those of whom aren't suffering from drug addiction or some sort of debilitating disability, there's a program that's basically being discussed. Oh yeah, there it is. The Riverside Plan. Yeah, it's in LA.
Can we go ahead and grab that?
Yeah, and what it's designed to do is it sets up multiple people, kind of creating how do I put this? I would say almost like a support system, but not quite. And it puts them on the right trajectory. So it allows them to get a career. It lets them get health care, gets them get access to education if they need to. It sets them up so that way they can actually get a career that is adding something to the society. And they get to work at the same time, and then they work for the program, so that way the program gets funding through a combination of both their work as well as support from the community. So that way the community's not footing the bill 100%. It's everyone kind of paying into it. Mm-hmm. And in that way, it kind of reminds me of kind of like the original plan for the Social Security system that eventually was thrown out, which was a good plan, but then modified by crooked politicians. But I don't want to go into that particular one. We're not going down that rabbit hole. Maybe not even then.
Okay.
But
so, article has been put into the chat, and it will also be put into the description for anybody to read at their own pace.
Yeah, and it's an interesting proposal. We'll see how it goes in a couple of years and see if it actually pans out. But it looks like it could potentially be quite helpful. I mean, these things take about a decade to figure out if it's going to work anyway. So, I mean, this is certainly not going to be an immediate answer, but hopefully it'll be something for some people to latch onto. All right. Was there a policy or a program that you are aware of that you're kind of happy exists? And
to be honest, I'm not going to say much because I don't know enough about policies to know which ones existed now versus 10 years ago.
Okay. Well, what about a policy that you're aware of, regardless of 10 years or not? Just a policy period that exists that you're happy about.
I think any policy that really helps with mental health issues, really.
Okay.
Because I remember discussing in the past that there wasn't really that much being done for research for mental health care, and now it's a big thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, definitely funding for mental health programs definitely saw a nosedive in the 80s with the Reagan administration, to be honest. And it took till the Clinton administration to start bouncing back, and even then it wasn't fully, to a point where people actually could get the full coverage they needed. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's actually more recent. So that's actually kind of cool.
So if I'm happy for anything, it's mental health, because it's not easily seen, It's mental.
Yeah, it goes on inside the head. Very difficult to figure out.
Yeah. So that's if I had to pick one.
Yeah. Right. So when it comes to the next thing, I believe we kind of we hit a note on the beginning part, but
a little bit.
Yeah.
So we mentioned it before. So we mentioned taxes earlier, whatnot, what they go to. Speaking of which, inform me and potentially others who really hate doing their taxes.
Okay. Well, see, here's the thing. People hate doing the taxes because they hate having to pay money, and especially hate having to pay money into things that they don't really appreciate, understand, or are aware of how it works. Because a lot of times people will see taxes being spent, and then they'll drive past the same pothole for 2 years and what the fuck are my taxes going to?
Oh, get me started on those. Anyway, so to help inform people about where that money actually goes to.
Okay. Where does it actually go to?
And
all right, so
I'll continue later.
Yeah, so the answer to this is not exactly super nuanced. It's I'm gonna give kind of the bare bones version of it, and I think that we have I want to say we grabbed the 2 pie charts that I asked about presenting. Maybe if we didn't, it's okay. I'll just explain. So
I have the article
Okay, yeah.
But
So,
that's bad.
there's an article that I found to help explain the subject earlier to some of the staff, just because I apparently was one of the few people in the staff who understood this to any degree, and so I pulled up this article to kind of help explain kind of how spending works. And so, if you want to know in extreme detail, then great. Here's the article. If you are just wanting to hear the brief Cliff Notes version of it, I'm going to give that to you right now. So, there are two forms of spending that happens when it comes to the government. There's the first one, which is the mandatory spending. Mandatory spending is a whole bunch of stuff that you probably could figure out is like duh. And this is like the military, which is I believe 46% of that particular budget annually. It does change because there's this wonderful little thing called the black budget, which a lot of people aren't really aware of, although they probably heard the term before, which is a amount of money that is not necessarily disclosed, and it is given to the military to conduct secretive activities. This is the development of spy aircraft, space stuff, potentially, all sorts of other fun, neat things that you probably aren't aware of. Then there is the next one, which is kind of like the other things, which is the national debt. They pay a certain percentage of the national debt, and a lot of people like to have fun with various people, and say, hey, China, we owe all this money to China. Actually, the biggest percentage of people who own the U.S. debt are actually U.S. citizens, through a combination of bonds and things like that. China actually only has about, if I remember correctly, it was like 100 billion or something like that, which is a shit ton of money. But like it's not nearly the ginormous number that some people have, and that might have increased. Well, actually, not might have. It definitely has increased since I've actually said something, because it increases every moment of every second of every day. Because wars are expensive. U.S. is greedy. I mean, etc. Yada 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 yada. Anyways, we're not going down that rabbit hole. Then the other things that it essentially helps pay for are things like grants that are given to contractors to develop certain building and projects for U.S. infrastructure. There's the education system gets a certain denomination of money, which they use to help public schools or dole out grants for college students. There are programs that are set in place so that way you can get loans for school that are subsidized by taxes and things like that. Obviously, the budgets for all the people who work for all the elements of the government, from the president to like the secretary, like in somebody's office, all their budgets come out from taxes. Those are all the mandatory expenses for the most part. There's a bunch of things I'm leaving out, but those are the things that kind of are mandatory. Then there's the secondary budget that people don't like to talk about. They like to pretend doesn't exist, and this is Congress's.
Discretionary?
Yes, the discretionary budget is the budget that essentially is kind of doled out to various individuals. This is where you get contract work. Often contractors do work for the military. This is how some contractor can charge $50,000 for a roll of toilet paper to a soldier in Afghanistan. Like, that's a thing. There's an evidence of a toilet seat being shipped over that was like $7,000. Like, I shit you not.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Was that a pun?
Ta-da! Yeah. I mean, it was unintentional, entirely unintentional, but kind of hilarious.
Moving on.
But yeah, so that budget goes for those particular things. Various things get spent in that particular way. Often, a lot of them are actually investments, and those investments are kind of shady and not really well disclosed. There's a whole bunch of other things that kind of go into it, but the biggest one to keep in your eyes on is that discretionary budget is actually sometimes used to help fund certain states, and sometimes in illegal circumstances, the discretionary budget has been used to assist the political process and the promoting of certain candidates, which is a no-no, but has been done before. Just so.
So the discretionary spending is where it kind of depends on like the county, the city, the state.
Yeah, your elected officials decide how that money's spent. In essence, that's basically what it's used for. The idea behind it primarily is to help pay for things that are unexpected. Like, let's say hypothetically, like something horrible happens to a building, right? That's unexpected. You know, let's say a helicopter crashes into the Capitol building or something like that, right? The budget is supposed to be there to be things like, oh, hey, we need to repair this, clean it up, etc., like that. Because it's not like they're going to be like, well, you know, come out here, engineers, come take this helicopter out of here and start rebuilding this place. Oh, by the way, we're the government, so it's free, right? Like, our country doesn't work that way. I mean, there are places in the world that do, but ours do not. So, anyway, so that's enough about the budget. I think that's the Cliff Note version. Of course, if you look into it more, you'll see all the little nuances and things like that. And obviously, I left out tons of things on both of those things, but that's the gist.
All right. Moving on here.
Like, there's a reason why that's actually kind of important, though. It's because, if let's say hypothetically, right, that you were trying to defend 100%, you were trying to be like, hey, look, absolutely the society is not in decline because we have money to be able to spend on indiscriminate things that, you know, no one has to necessarily keep super account for. That could be some evidence to strongly suggest that we have money to throw around, so clearly we aren't doing that bad.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's just something to kind of throw out there, because like I don't want people to think that I'm being incredibly super biased. Like, I want to be fair to the subject, and I think that kind of points to an example of how things kind of are fair in some ways. So.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Now, next one. So, with the tech we have today, it's possible to trade with almost every corner of the globe, as you mentioned with the toilet seat.
Yeah.
That was a new one. So
it's actually not that new. That happened in 2008. Just so you know.
Oh my.
Yeah, it's not new. That happened 12 years ago. So like.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah, Amazon's crazy, right? I'm joking. Amazon did not deliver that toilet seat.
All right. So, because of the tech we have, because of all the trade happening, what do you think about today's economy?
Okay, so economy is kind of a tricky thing to say in the first place because there's the global economy idea, all right, where you can kind of look at like who are the big players and who's doing well and who's not. And then there's like you could look at individual countries' GDP, which kind of is.
What does GDP stand for again?
Well.
Just to reiterate what that actually is.
Well, essentially it's the gross domestic product.
Thank you.
And gross domestic product is kind of like a fancy way of saying how much stuff do you produce in your country, and how much are you worth, kind of, you know, like how much do you technically produce? And the U.S., just so that way everyone knows, the GDP for the U.S. is ridiculous. Like we make our GDP is almost equivalent to our entire debt. So like I think we just recently surpassed. The debt was more than our actual GDP, but like that just to put an idea of like how many trillions of dollars we're in debt, and yet we're like just now getting to the point where in a single year we couldn't pay it all off if we could theoretically save for a year. So it's like that's just, just kind of like crazy.
Thank you. I've heard that acronym before, but I keep blanking on what it actually stands for.
Yeah. Well, gross domestic product, gross national product, both of those particular things are kind of like weird acronyms that have been used to kind of throw around, and honestly they kind of disguise and distract people. Like they're like, what are you trying to say again? Like I'm not sure. It's a tactic politicians use all the time.
Okay, so enough about that thing.
Sure. Yeah.
So what else about today's economy do you have to?
Well, I mean, like there's lots of things to point towards the fact that, like, you know, the United States economy, economically speaking, I mean, is depending upon who you ask, it's either the strongest, best, most impressive economy in the world or a dumpster fire. So, like, the economy, the way in which it's talked about is incredibly like, I don't want to say that. What I want to say is that it's nuanced and it can be predetermining in some ways, but more importantly than anything else, and I'm trying my best not to dance around this issue, because it kind of could be used to point towards the exact opposite of what we're trying to discuss. But
just do the opposite of a character on the moment.
I don't know. Just whoosh, you know? We're just going to say this. I don't want to talk about it. Let's move on.
All right.
Let's move on.
If we get comments detailing it, I'd love to hear them.
All right. If people want me to say something about it, then they can ask the question. But let's just move on because I don't. Okay.
It's a dangerous question.
It's like playing ping pong with a grenade. Like describing
That's a hot potato.
Describing the economy is one of the most complex things that you could possibly do. There's reasons why people's entire careers are designed to discuss the day-to-day like workings of the economy. So like I don't feel like a person who is versed enough to understand what's going on but not like super like in depth has the ability to sufficiently describe this process in a way that I think would elevate the conversation.
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and skedaddle. So, in your opinion, or what do you think about this question? So, are societies more connected or disconnected in comparison to the past? And how would this connect to whether a society is prosperous versus being in decline?
Okay. All right, if you think about it, that's probably got a whole bunch of questions rolled up into it. So,
probably.
Simply put, I think society-wise, I think we're probably more connected than ever before. Just because our ability to get to different parts of the world, to be able to interact with different people from different walks of life, from the types of trading that is done throughout the world, it shows that we're willing to at least reach out to as many people and cultures as possible. Now, whether that's a good thing or not, whether that brings us together as individuals, is that helpful? That's another question altogether.
Okay.
But would I say that societies are successful in being able to connect to people today in comparison to the past? Absolutely. I think in the past you were limited based on the technology of the day, the sheer distance that certain groups were, and the overall lack of knowledge or awareness of those groups in the first place. So definitely in that particular way, yes. Whether it speaks to societies being in decline or being successful and prosperous, I don't know. I think that it's kind of like a mixed bag. I think some parts of the world kind of get exploited, and that exploitation creates a huge vacuum of wealth in certain areas and also affects the way in which those people are. So I would say that some parts of the world get incredibly prosperous off of this particular thing, similar to what Nerd Sappy had mentioned in the chat much earlier in the episode. And in that way, I think that her original comment makes a lot of sense if you look at it from that particular frame of reference. But I think it would be difficult to say globally whether or not that an individual, exploited group is necessarily going to equate to overall decline or overall prosperity just based on that particular position. I think it would be difficult to make that statement. So I don't really know how to answer that part.
Okay. Once we have more research done, we can discuss it in more detail.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, if it's something that people are curious about, we can always look into it, and I can try and do my best at making a better answer than that, if that matters. But I suspect most people probably are like in the same boat as me, and so I I think it's just kind of be like one of those. Okay, moving on.
Speaking of which, so from what we know, what are some of the newer governmental policies to help improve society, and, well, what are your opinions of them? Like, do you think they are helpful? Do you think they're working? Do you think they need to be improved on? That sort of thing.
All right. Well, I'm going to speak from a U.S. perspective on this particular issue because I don't know what too many other governments are really trying to do. I am mildly aware of Canada. I'm mildly aware of Mexico. Mildly aware of the UK. And a couple of policies have been written by the European Union, but outside of that, I couldn't really speak to too many other things. But what I will say when it comes to the U.S. is that, I mean, clearly we pulled out of Afghanistan trying to make sure that Americans weren't dying needlessly, but that seems to have had dramatic negative effects that we're only beginning to find out. So, I mean, did we just, did we waste American lives stabilizing a region of the world for more than 20 years, only to basically withdraw a whole bunch of people, destabilize the previously stable country, and do what? I think our intentions are noble, our policies are not.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's how
That's a yikes.
That's how I would say that. And I think that, like, the thing is, though, right?
Yeah.
If you're gonna make an omelet, you're gonna crack some eggs. It is a great, like, kind of analogy to describe what's necessary for a society that is trying to not be stagnant or in decline, but trying to be prosperous. You have to be willing to take risks, take chances, and try to do things that are going to generate some level of good. And sometimes things don't go according to plan. Sometimes things just go badly. And just because something doesn't go according to plan, just because something goes badly, doesn't mean you should stop. I mean, good God, how many times have we had terrible things happen on our channel, right? That went completely off the rails, did not go according to plan, and we didn't fold. We kept going. So I think that, like, that kind of outlook is what's necessary for something to succeed and to do well. You have to keep on trying at it. So I would say that, like, at least from a U.S. policy situation, I think more often than not, there's a lot of stuff that kind of points towards, yes, things are doing well. And the way they do it is by enacting, their actual intentions. They actually make them known. Thank God that our current president, at the very least, some people don't like him for various reasons. That's fine. But I think that the good thing is that he is at least doing what he's saying, and he's being fairly transparent about it. Now, there's lots of things to say negative about Joe Biden, but the one thing I can definitely say is that he's at least being transparent, and you're not left to guess what or why he's doing certain things. So.
All right.
All right.
I wasn't expected to go, that far.
Yeah, but I mean, hey, these things happen.
It's important to talk about. I just wasn't expecting it. All right. So that's international policy. Why don't we bring it back kind of more local, more communal?
Okay.
Communal. So you mentioned the program that's meant to help the homeless and whatnot.
Yes.
Do you happen to know of any other programs that are being designed or in progress to help the homeless?
Not 100%, to be honest with you. I know that in the state of California, there's a massive homeless problem in both LA County and in Sacramento County. And I live pretty close to Sacramento County, so I've seen what's going on.
Yeah.
So I can say that in Sacramento County, it seems that the government lawmakers are turning a blind eye to a lot of it. I think they're leaving a lot of what to do up to the community, and the community has kind of answered with, okay, we're going to feed and clothe them, and we're going to try and get them off the streets, and we're going to try and put them into a place where they can stay warm and they can be put to a position where they're going to be safe, and potentially we can set things up so that way hopefully these people can transition. I know that for people who aren't aware of what the food stamps are, Food Stamps has expanded its coverage because of the whole pandemic. They've also allowed people who do not have a home to be more readily able to sign up for those particular benefits, and they've allowed for more benefits to being done. So in that particular way, I guess from that level, that's a good thing, but outside of those particular things, there isn't too much being done, and it is kind of a huge problem, especially in California. So.
Yeah, okay.
But I will say this, the fact that the average citizen is willing to help support the homeless points to the fact that society as a whole, at least in the immediate community, seems to be willing to do something, which might point to it not being in decline. Just want to point that out.
Because it's not as, like, self-serving?
Yeah, because it's not like a dystopian kind of situation where you have people just trying to act for themselves and only being selfish and only caring about themselves and doing things that only work for them. They're willing to extend a hand of help to a person in need. They're willing to acknowledge the fact that there are people who are less fortunate than them, and that those people deserve something, in kind.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. So we're almost out of time, and I want to make sure I get this question both to you, the rest of the staff at Wicked Parley, and to our audience, because this one's kind of a more opinion-based question.
Okay.
So, in comparison to life, at least 2 or 3 decades ago, what do you believe the best improvement is between society back then and society today?
Okay, I'm gonna say I mean, good God, 3 decades ago. Okay, so let's put it this way: we're in 2020, so one decade ago would be 2010. Another decade would be 20. Another decade would be 1990. What progress has happened between 1990 and today? Well, you can look at the fact that the ways in which people who contracted HIV or AIDS, they went from being demonized and feared to being accepted and being able to receive treatment. A crap ton has happened in the mental health game to be able to not only diagnose and treat, but accept the fact that some people have problems, some people are different, and that just because they're different, they're not less human. I think is a huge point that shows that we are progressing towards something that is better society-wise as a whole, which there's definitely strong evidence to support that. In fact, that's, in my particular opinion, that is the strongest evidence of society not being in decline, is the fact that we have so many programs that are able to help facilitate and do something about the less fortunate and needy in this world.
So definitely a lot has improved.
Yeah, I mean, like, across the board. I think the only things that I can really say outside of that I can point to that's in the last 3 decades has to do with this whole idea of, I guess, being okay with the different genders and different sexual orientations. While there's still bigots out there, and there's still people who are confused and people who are unable to be treated fairly. I think that a lot of progress has been made in the right direction to make some of those inequalities, more balanced and more fair. And while nothing is perfect, I think we are definitely moving in the right direction.
Yeah. So this particular question is, in your opinion, what's the best one?
The best one.
Obviously, there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong answer.
It speaks to what you find to be important when it comes to improving society. So it's there's been a lot of improvements, but out of all of them, for you, for the audience, for myself and other staff members, it's kind of a thinking process. What is the best one over these past couple of decades?
Honestly, I don't think I actually know. I mean, I'd like to tell you one and be like, yeah, that's the one that's the most. But I feel like if I were to tell anyone one thing and be like, this is the most important, then it immediately invalidates everything else in my mind. And I know that that's probably not the way everyone would look at it, but to me, it takes something away. And I think that the most important thing is to acknowledge the achievements of everyone and not be like, this one's more or this one's better for this reason or another. Because at the end of the day, to me, all you really need is an understanding and an appreciation for the types of things in which we as a society have been able to come together and overcome, and for us to have a clear direction of where we're going from here. And I think that those two things are really necessary. If they're not the most important things in a society, then they need to be, because you need to be able to accept the fact that that you are living in a society that is the product of the hard work of literally millions of other people. And you have to be able to appreciate the fact that so many of these people worked tirelessly and probably didn't see the benefit that you're getting to enjoy. And so by being able to acknowledge that, I think you're at least giving those people some credit, some due. That even if you never met them, even if you don't know their names, even if you don't know anything about them, just acknowledging the fact that these people did this thing to allow you to be where you're at, is important. And I think also it's equally important to be able to go, okay, well, we've accomplished this much. Let's not lose momentum. Let's not try and slide back. Let's not try to relent something. Let's continue moving forward to honor the people who came before me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's kind of like my take on that, honestly.
Fair.
Do you have a take on it?
For me, if I had to pick one, it would be the ability to understand. To be able to understand, like you mentioned, the amount of effort that people put into what they do. Being able to understand each other, understand our differences. Obviously, it's something that can be improved on, but compared to before, with the amount of bigots that were loud and quote-unquote proud before,
Mm-hmm.
the ability to understand what's going on with your life, what's going on with people's lives, and understanding the connections between each and everything in existence. That to me is a lot of importance, because the amount of doors that open because you're able to understand everything that's happening around you,
Mm-hmm.
opening doors rather than blocking off certain thinking patterns and opinions and perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
That ability to understand is what I find to be one of the best improvements.
So the fact that more people are more cognizant of all the pathways in which a person can travel
Mm-hmm.
is what you think is the most important.
Yeah, like I do agree with you that for some it might feel like invalidating other ones, but it's more of, it is every single improvement we had is important.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to pick one over the rest, and only because I'm forced to, it would be that one.
I see.
I appreciate each and every improvement. I really do. But that one is the one I appreciate the most.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, I think at this particular position, do you feel that we have presented enough evidence for you to feel comfortable saying that society is not in decline, or do you think that there is evidence that could overturn that position at this point?
Don't ask me that when we haven't even done the second one. Thank you very much.
You hear that, everyone? She's scared to answer, which tells me I already know the answer.
Yeah. Don't even get me started.
Inference is important. Well, everybody, do you have anything else to say?
All I have really are some updates for
All right.
people.
All right. Let's hear updates.
So this is the last live stream for this month, which means next Wednesday is not only a new monthly challenge, but it is an overview of this month's monthly challenge, which, okay, I can see from our host's face that he's not happy. To give a reminder as to what this month's challenge was, it was to have no added sugar for the entirety of the month. So not only are we going to give an overview on that, we're getting a new monthly challenge next Wednesday. We also have our gaming live stream tomorrow, so be sure to check that out if you have the time. We've done a couple more questions of the day on TikTok and Twitter.
Losing train of thought.
I was about to say Twitcher.
Twitcher. On Twitcher. Just combine them both. It's fine.
Yeah, pretty much.
We'll get there. We'll all understand. Eventually they will be anyway, so.
And we have plenty more episode topics. Again, if you would like to become a guest, please email the show, or if you know anyone who would like to become a guest, again, email the show. We'll be happy to discuss topics, and we'll be happy to kind of pick your brain about what you think about what we talk about.
Yeah, and obviously, there is a vetting process, so it is not just simply, sign up and hey, you get to talk on the show, just so that way it's very clear. But if you have something meaningful to say, or you think there's something that can be added to a conversation, then please come talk to us. Well, I just want to say, assuming that there's nothing else in the chat. Is there anything else in the chat? Okay. I just want to say thanks to everybody for showing up. Thank you very much for participating in the conversation. I appreciate the feedback, and I appreciate the insight. And I hope that in the future we'll be able to have more discussions kind of like this. And I hope that the part 2 is not too negative. And stay tuned for part 2 for this particular subject. And I guess have a good night. And we'll see you all in the next one. Later, everybody.